I'm really excited today to introduce our speaker, Kevin Bleyer. I was calling him Kevin Blair, and he told me it was Bleyer, and it rhymes with liar, so I got it down. So one of my favorite parts about hosting these tech talks is obviously getting to come up here and do the intros, because I get to try my hand at comedy. I'm a little intimidated today because I'm introducing Kevin, who's a writer for The Daily Show, so I'm not gonna try. But I did decide to use a really quality intro on Kevin that I'd read, and I feel describes his work a little better than I could. So, Emmy Award winner Kevin Bleyer is an Emmy Award-winning writer for The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, for which he has won multiple Emmy Awards. Before rewriting the Constitution, Bleyer co-authored the #1 New York Times bestseller, Earth, the book, and negotiated bipartisan consensus as a writer and producer for Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher and Dennis Miller. Since 2008, he's been a term member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and since 2009 has been a contributor to President Obama's White House Correspondents' Dinner addresses, so he secretly runs the government already. Kevin lives here in New York City, where he regularly poses for portraits. Please join me for welcoming our guest, Mr. Kevin Bleyer.
That's some highlights. Wow. Thank you. No, please sit down. You're embarrassing me. Stop that. I'm blushing. You've done it. Thank you so much. It is an honor to be here, and heck, sure, yeah, it's an honor for you to have me here. Why not? I'll agree with you. That's sweet of you to say. Truly an honor to be here at Google, and I do feel like this is one of the few places where I feel it might be more appropriate for me to tell you to turn on your cell phones. I'm sure you hear that a lot. My name is Kevin Bleyer, and to see so many people here and to know that people are watching online, if it's possible for someone who just rewrote the entire Constitution of the United States to say he is humbled, I guess I could say I'm humbled. I did, in fact, as you have heard, somehow, single-handedly rewrote the entire Constitution of the United States by myself, without any help from any of you people. So I don't know where you were. Frankly, I'm exhausted. Now, when I tell people that I rewrote the Constitution, the question I often hear, either from their lips or just in my head, is, well, why did you do that? And there are a dozen very good answers that are in the book. There are also a few very poor answers that are also in the book. And I'll tell you a few of them right now. It would be perhaps too convenient, although not altogether incorrect, to say, well, I saw everyone else rewriting the Constitution, so why not me? My turn. It seemed only fair. I could also say to you, you know what, even if I rewrote the Constitution, knowing what I know now about the Constitution, I'm not so sure that anyone would have even noticed. And I'll tell you what I mean by this. Most Americans, and I would probably have to say some of you probably in this room too, don't even know exactly what's in the Constitution. A few stats I'll throw at you. More American teenagers can name the Three Stooges than can name the 3 branches of government. And by the way, that's the Three Stooges. It's not like it's Justin Bieber. American teenagers now can name the Three Stooges more than they can name the 3 branches of government. 9 in 10 adults believe that of the people, by the people, for the people is in the Constitution, even though it is of the Gettysburg Address by President Abraham Lincoln, and for crying out loud, they probably learned that at some point. Most egregious, I say to you, is that nearly half of Americans, also true, think that From Each According to His Ability, To Each According to His Needs was written by James Madison, not Karl Marx. And by the way, Karl Marx is not one of the Three Stooges for those teenagers who happen to be tuning in, nor is he actually a Marx brother. I mean, he is a Marx brother, he had brothers, but I don't think they were known for being very funny. And so, I tell you, when John Boehner himself, in 2009, stood up, held up a copy of his pocket Constitution at a rally in Ohio, and said, I stand here with the founders, with the framers, who wrote in the preamble of the Constitution, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, and yet didn't realize that's actually the second sentence in the Declaration of Independence. I thought, you know what, there's an opportunity here. Perhaps I can step up. Now, in fairness, and I've been careful to point this out anywhere I've been, I begrudge no one, I denigrate him, not at all, nor do I denigrate anyone with these blind spots, because I'm sure my blind spots are just as large. They certainly were before I started this project. Had you asked me a few years ago, before I started researching this book, how does the Constitution begin, I may have said, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Which, by the way, is not altogether untrue if you think about what happened in 1787. But an even better answer to the question of why I rewrote the Constitution is this. I had no choice. No less than Thomas Jefferson himself told me I had to. Thomas Jefferson, who I think we can all agree is one of the more foundery of the Founding Fathers, and therefore someone we should probably listen to, said to the world back then that every constitution on earth naturally expires at the end of 19 years. If it be enforced longer, it is an act of force and not of right. Every constitution. So in other words, by his math, our Constitution has been expired for over 2 centuries. Dead, kaput, an ex-parrot, you might say. His words. And so by his math, I should have rewritten this over 200 years ago. It should have been rewritten 11 times by now. And frankly, I feel bad I'm just getting to it now. I've been slacking for 2 centuries, so I owe all of you an apology. What's more, in my research, I also, even though we see people cozy up to the Constitution, say they know what's in it, cite it, put it on posters, often incorrectly, even though it seems to be a weapon in the debate, so to speak, and used as a weapon, unfortunately, in the debate, I still feel like it needs some good publicity these days. And I have some very significant statistics also to suggest that. 25 years ago, of the 170 countries that then existed, a full 160 of them, and keep in mind, some of these countries are rather old. Of those countries, 160 actually based their constitutions, at least in part, on our Constitution. In the last 25 years, when fledgling democracies go shopping around for a constitution, what percentage of them now do so? Precisely 0, according to a study in the Harvard Law Review, which I found rather amusing, or interesting, or rather devastating, too. Not to mention that just a couple months ago, no less than Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg herself was in Egypt, and she told the Egyptians if she were designing a democracy in 2012, she would actually not use the American Constitution as a model. Now, that was kind of surprising to me, because you'd think of her as someone who's out to protect every clause of the Constitution, and if she's not going to blindingly, unthinkingly, and ignorantly, as I am doing, go out and cheerlead for the Constitution, at least I can, even though I'm totally unauthorized to do so. The only time I wear a robe is at the spa. Now, I will tell you that what these other countries are doing is they're looking to other countries' constitutions. More often now, they're looking to South Africa, a fairly new constitution, and this is especially galling to me, an American patriot, they're looking to Canada. Apparently because those constitutions, in their estimation, care more about human rights and something called the environment, that's what it is. And finally, I suppose the most legitimate reason that I rewrote the Constitution is I figured, well, if Apple can rewrite their iTunes service agreement every 19 minutes, certainly I can rewrite the Constitution every 19 years. Seems fair. And by the way, that brings up, I want to give due diligence and due credence to the people here today and say that I owe you a thank you as well. Because after suggesting all these statistics, I want to read how Google actually became a part of my research, or as I call it, my me-search. Yes, that's right, I did win an Emmy for wordplay like that. Ridiculous. So I'll read this section, it's early on. It goes a little, I'll read this section first. So is it any wonder, I ask you, that President George W. Bush once called the Constitution, and I quote, a goddamn piece of paper? Not to me. Well, because unlike you, I Googled that quote just now. Apparently it is apocryphal, which I also Googled and learned is another way of saying not true. Never happened. Bogus. Evidently, a few years ago, a left-wing muckraker spread the rumor that one of the president's aides advised him not to renew the Patriot Act on account of it possibly being unconstitutional, and the president supposedly said, quote, stop throwing the Constitution in my face, it's just a goddamn piece of paper. Oh, sure, there might be some truthiness to that, but it is nonetheless a lie. Didn't happen. The 43rd President of the United States never said that the Constitution he swore an oath to uphold, quote, to the best of his ability through rain or sleet or gloom of night, note to self, Google presidential oath of office, was, quote, just a goddamn piece of paper. After all, it couldn't possibly be a goddamn piece of paper, not when our third president had already and long ago declared it, quote, a mere thing of wax. Thomas Jefferson, not long after the Constitution was in force, lamented aloud that the justices of the Supreme Court had already usurped the right of, quote, exclusively explaining the Constitution, and therefore could, as the nation's first judicial activists, twist and shape it, unquote, into any form they please. Like so much revolutionary Play-Doh. By calling dibs on the first constitutional metaphor, Jefferson has beaten Bush to the punch by 200 years. It is no goddamn piece of paper, it is a mere thing of wax. Now, to suggest that violating the Constitution, as Thomas Jefferson admitted that he did in the Louisiana Purchase, is somehow uncommon or unpresidential or worse, un-American, overlooks an inconvenient truth. Namely, yes, if not for that flagrant violation of the Constitution, known as the Louisiana Purchase, by none other than Thomas Jefferson, we'd hardly recognize the country we see on so many elementary school maps. America wouldn't be America. If the third president of the United States hadn't shrugged off the document he had sworn to protect, quote, by hook or by crook, unquote, note to self, seriously, man, Google the presidential oath of office already, and doubled the size of the nation with the stroke of a pen, even though the Constitution gave him no such authority, the western coast of America would be on the eastern bank of the Mississippi. We would be crowning thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining St. Louis. Jefferson knew this, too. In embarking on the most aggressive executive action in history, he was quite aware he was sticking his neck out too far. The Constitution might not approve. The executive, he wrote, referring to himself, in seizing the fugitive occurrence which so much advances to the good of the country, have done an act beyond the Constitution. Jefferson rationalized his decision, telling himself that his act of subversion was a vote of confidence in the fledgling nation. Quote, I did this for your own good, he wrote, plainly. His guilty conscience even spurred him to devise an excuse if the pitchfork-wielding guardians of the Constitution came knocking at his door. Quote, I thought it my duty to risk myself for you, unquote. It is a startling admission for any president of the United States. His sworn assignment was, thank you, Google, to, quote, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. His higher duty was to thwart it. But now the question absolutely will remain, but why rewrite the Constitution? Why do a comic, fraudulent Jeremiah takedown of every article, amendment, and the preamble, rather than just point at and say, hey, it's not so bad? I actually begin the very beginning of the book with an anecdote that explains specifically why I decided to do this. And it goes a little bit like, by the way, this is my bookmark. It's an occupational hazard. And in fact, it's the exact same bookmark that you see there. I posed with it. So here's the anecdote that explains every word in this book. Their beloved bell was in jeopardy. It had hung dutifully for decades, pealing hourly from its steeple above the Pennsylvania State House, breaking the peace of the Philadelphia streets, only to remind its citizens that time had marched on and all was well. But these were no longer peaceful times. It was 1777, a year after America had declared her independence from the British Crown, and only days after her lion-hearted general, George Washington, had suffered a withering defeat at the Battle of Brandywine. All signs were that Philadelphia, the revolutionary capital, might well be the next to fall. Fearing that the King's men would melt any metal they found into British cannons, a few American patriots confiscated their own bell, soon to be known appropriately as the Liberty Bell, and hid it in the safest place they could find, under a pile of horse manure. The gambit worked. The marauding redcoats never got their British hands on our American liberty. The lesson learned back then rings as clear today. Sometimes, in order to save and honor something we cherish, we have to shit on it. You were ahead of me over there, I could tell. So yes, that I would think justifies, it gives me the political cover to write this book. I was also amused, as you might have seen just a few weeks ago, the maintenance crew at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, where the Liberty Bell is, had spent an entire day and a half adding a protective shellac to the outside of the Liberty Bell. And I can't help but think, knowing as we do now where the Liberty Bell has been, they're about 240 years too late. The founders actually knew this, and most of them suspected, at the end of that time in Philadelphia, that the Constitution that they wrote by September is, as the kids might say, a bit of a hot mess. For starters, this venerated document doesn't mention the word slavery or the word democracy or even Facebook. It plays favorites among the states, giving Wyoming as many senators as New York, and I mean, come on. It has typos and misspellings and a smudge that, and this is true, may or may not be a comma, empowering the government to seize your house depending on which constitutional scholar you ask. It is, as we know, scrawled with the quill of a goose on the skin of a goat, and its preamble its famous preamble, its most famous introductory passage, was written by Delegate Gouverneur Morris, a man with a peg leg. They called him the Peg Leg Morris. And while his preamble is notoriously beautiful, it nonetheless gives our sacred Constitution hardly a leg to stand on. People, okay, there we go. Groan if you must, and you should, but the founders knew this too. And in fact, by the way, just so you know, New York is #1. I should say this. I spend some time in Article 4, which the Article 4 is actually supposed to referee disputes among the states, and sometimes it doesn't do such a great job. So I decided the only way to really solve the problem is to go ahead and rank the states already. Now, I rank New York as #1, obviously, but depending how the rest of this afternoon goes, I'm just saying, we could fall a few spots. George Washington himself, the man who presided over the Constitutional Convention, agrees with me about the flaws in the Constitution. It was he who predicted that the flawed Constitution would become controversial. A child of fortune, he said, to be fostered by some but buffeted by others. And when the Constitutional Convention was over, he said explicitly, quote, "I wished it had been made more perfect." Benjamin Franklin himself stomached it only, quote, "with all its faults." And in fact, on the very last day of the Constitutional Convention, Benjamin Franklin gave a speech that I think somewhat hilariously sums up what he really probably thought about their handiwork that day. It was in the same speech where he said that he wished everyone would doubt their infallibility and put their name to the measure. And he finished the speech by saying this, and I think you just need to read between the lines a little bit, see what he's really saying to understand what he actually felt about the 4 months of compromise that they had just done. He says, quote, "I confess that there are several parts of this Constitution which I do not at present approve, but I am not sure I shall never approve them. I doubt whether any other convention we can obtain may be able to make a better Constitution. Thus I consent to this Constitution because I expect no better, and because I am not sure that it is not the best." Which you might say he sounds like a Republican endorsing Mitt Romney. Exactly, damning with faint praise. Whereas, unlike my book, which I hope people understand the true intent as Justice Scalia did, and I'll talk about him a little bit later, that I'm hopefully praising with faint damnation. You'll see that I actually come back around. I don't want to spoil the ending, and I want to tell you that the butler did or didn't do it, but if anything, only accomplice, and I'll get to that a little bit too. Because as these founders knew, while we think of the Constitution as, yes, the painstakingly designed blueprint drawn up by what Thomas Jefferson called an assembly of demigods, who laid the foundation for the sturdiest republic ever created, all true. By the end of that summer in Philadelphia, the framers knew the truth, that the Constitution was not exactly a blueprint. They would have agreed that it was a bit of a, and I used this phrase as I wrote it a year ago, a bit of an Etch A Sketch, a haphazard series of blunders. They admitted that they had to shake clean and redraw dozens of times during a sweltering summer of petty debates, drunken ramblings, wild improvisation, and desperate compromise. You have to imagine it. We had this last weekend in New York, right? It was miserably hot. In Philadelphia, it was even hotter, and they were there for 4 months in the sweltering summer of Philadelphia, wearing powdered wigs, wool coats. They locked the doors, they shuttered the windows for privacy. There was no such thing as air conditioning. It was an unventilated room. There was a prison riot right across the street. Butchers were throwing animal carcasses that they were done with, truly within feet of the Pennsylvania State House. So you can imagine, it was pungent all over the place. Not to mention that they were, in fact, drinking beer for breakfast. Now, the truth of the matter is, most people drank beer for breakfast because it was cleaner than water, but nonetheless, the fact remains, they were drinking beer for breakfast. And in fact, you don't actually have to. I do a pretty lengthy explanation of what actually transpired during those 4 months, and I conclude, and I explain kind of how it all concluded as well, if I can find the page, because my bookmark has disappeared. It's now over here somewhere. Oh, there we go. There we go. So again, after 4 months, now we understand how it all happened, or rather, almost didn't. The Constitution wasn't only a miracle at Philadelphia written by an assembly of demigods. It was that, but it was also the contrary. What began as a measured, deliberate effort to rescue a beleaguered country became a perpetual, unresolved motion machine, a maddening cycle of non-binding votes by a parade of toothless committees marked by fits and starts, fights and full stops, conducted by a combative group of exhausted, drunken, broke, petty, partisan, scheming, squabbling, bloviating, backstabbing, grandstanding, godforsaken, posturing, restless, cow-tipping, homesick, cloistered, claustrophobic, sensory-deprived, under-oxygenated, fed up, talked out, overheated delegates, so distraught and despairing, they threatened violence, secession, foreign allegiance, and even prayer, as Benjamin Franklin said, and concluded for those who didn't abandon the proceedings altogether with as much premeditation and forethought as a game of musical chairs. The last, least abhorrent, mutually somewhat acceptable idea on the table when the music stopped, or the heat became too unbearable, or the liquor too strong, or the rioting too loud, or the pressure too intense, or the company too loathsome, or the wigs too uncomfortable, or the patience too thin, became the law of the land, as much the product of, yes, an assembly of demigods, as, yes, some might say a confederacy of what could be dunces on occasion. From page 1, the Constitution is, by its own admission, a great compromise. It is also what you get when you drink beer for breakfast. Now, amusingly, they didn't just drink beer for breakfast. I'm actually understating that, because the truth of the matter is they drank a lot of beer at that time. They drank a lot of everything at that time. The statistics are astounding, but I'll just point this out. When they finally decided what was going to be in the Constitution, and they knew they were about to sign it, well, they threw a party, because they knew that they'd finally be able to bid adieu to each other. But this is what happened that night. They were about to add their signatures to an extremely anticipated official document that many of them had extremely mixed feelings about. So the delegates did what anyone might do under such pressure. They drank themselves silly. After they toasted the occasion, they drowned their miseries. They had spent 4 months compromising some of their values. Perhaps they could drink their guilt away. They certainly tried. In the span of just a few hours, the 55 men who crowded City Tavern on Friday, September 14th, 1787, guzzled enough alcohol to fell an army regiment. 60 bottles of claret, 54 bottles of Madeira, 50 bottles of old stock, vats of porter, cider, and beer, and what has been described as some bowls of rum. They weren't just pledging their sacred honor, they were pledging a frat. So wild did the celebration get that City Tavern, a place quite familiar with drunkenness, took the unusual step of sending along a bill for quote-unquote breakage. Pretty amusing to me. Honestly, the miracle at Philadelphia is that the Constitution wasn't written on the back of a bar napkin. That's a big question. Which actually brings me to my drinking companion, as I had just mentioned. One of the more fortunate accidents, really, in getting to research and write this book was getting to have lunch with Justice Scalia. Now, of course, you can understand. I wanted to meet with Justice Scalia because I thought who on the face of the planet, let alone in the country, would really be most amenable to a page 1 rewrite of the Constitution? And you got to assume it's the man who's devoted his entire life to protecting every phrase, clause, and punctuation in it. I was a little bit alarmed, or surprised, I guess I should say, that he agreed to meet with me, but of course also thrilled that he would. I should also say, of course, the truth of the matter is that he actually agrees with Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, who said the Constitution would be rewritten every 19 years, doesn't agree with that part, but he agrees with Jefferson that the Constitution is, and this is his words, dead. The difference is between him and Thomas Jefferson is that Justice Scalia means dead as a compliment, apparently. He means quit trying to revive it. He means honor it for what we know it was and adore it for all of those merits. He agreed to meet, and we did in fact talk of a lot of things in the Constitution, but I knew at some point that I would have to turn our attentions to his bread and butter, the third article, the judicial branch, where of course he makes his living. And I had to, what I hope I do in this book is address the actual issues that people have with the articles and amendments. My solutions are rather absurd, but I do address the actual issues. And one of the issues that people have with the Third Amendment, or excuse me, the third article, the Supreme Court, is this idea. And when I mention these words, you can see what happened. I broached the subject, and I said, well, Justice, Your Honor, you know that some people have a problem with lifetime tenure. And as soon as I got to tenure, he picked up a fork, poked it at me, and with a devilish grin said, don't you dare. Don't you dare change lifetime tenure. And if you do, at least grandfather me in because I like my job. Fair enough. But now here's the thing. The Constitution itself says nothing about Supreme Court justices having lifetime tenure. It merely says the justices shall hold their offices, quote unquote, during good behavior. Now, for a bunch of very good reasons, early on, we decided to interpret that as lifetime tenure because kings were removing judges willy-nilly from the bench, so they thought, let's go the other way with this. But nonetheless, it doesn't actually say lifetime tenure. It says merely during good behavior. And I felt it my job to say to him, well, let's consider in 2012 whether or not we should really still have lifetime tenure. And he put down the fork and let me and agreed to listen to me. And this is what transpired when that happened. I don't bother lecturing Justice Scalia on any of this. After decades of legal study and 25 years of service as one of America's top judges, he's been fully briefed. Instead, I begin my cross-examination. How about you, I ask. How about me what, he counters. Can you imagine just walking away, I ask. Of course I can, he scoffs, with a couldn't-care-less tone that implies he'd just as soon leave today if only he hadn't signed a 2-year lease on his Supreme Court locker. When, I ask. Like I've said before, he says, as soon as I'm not firing on all 8 cylinders, when I'm not doing the job as well as I used to, it'll be time to go. How will you know when that is? He looks me straight in the eye. I'll know. So you don't need some outside authority limiting the term of your service. I'm fairly aware of the requirements of the position, he interrupts me. I'll know when I can no longer fulfill them. And yet, what if I told you, Your Honor, that someone even more powerful than you says you're wrong about that? He looks at me. And who is that? Someone you know quite well. He looks at me again, wondering if he should ask. Who? If this were a case in some courtroom drama, this is the moment when I would stand slowly, scan the jury, look back at the judge, and call on my surprise witness. May it please the court, I now call to the stand, dramatic pause, the current Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. If this were indeed a courtroom drama, the double doors in the back of the courtroom would fly open, the stenographer would record the reaction of the gallery, audible gasps, and Chief Justice John G. Roberts, Jr. would saunter up the aisle, hesitating only long enough to lock eyes with fellow Justice Scalia and feel his glare. Et tu, Robertae. Roberts would then explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that no matter what he says or how he pleads for mercy, Justice Antonin Scalia should have been kicked off the court exactly 10 years ago. Back in real life, I explain what the hell I'm talking about. When he was a lawyer in the Reagan White House, 22 years before he joined the Supremes, John Roberts argued on behalf of a 15-year term limit for Supreme Court justices. It was both a pragmatic proposal, as he saw it, the founders, quote, adopted life tenure at a time when people simply did not live as long as they do now, unquote, and a principled one for many of the reasons I've trotted out here at lunch. A judge insulated from the normal currents of life for 25 or 30 years was a rarity then, but is becoming commonplace today, he wrote in a White House memo. Setting a term of, say, 15 years would ensure that federal judges would not lose all touch with, quote, reality through decades of ivory tower existence, unquote. It is an indictment of lifetime tenure too compelling to ignore. As I finish explaining, one thing becomes clear. Scalia knew nothing of this. Is that so, he asks? Roberts thought that? I have outlawyered the longest-serving Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. Really? He thought that? He asks again. Yes, I say, pausing a beat for dramatic effect. Yes, he did. For a moment, Scalia seems speechless. He can muster no defense. Even though we're sitting in the National Gallery, not the Supreme Court, and eating lunch, not arguing case law, I am tempted to shout, the prosecution rests, slam an imaginary briefcase and march out triumphantly. But I don't. I stay. And Scalia's grin returns. Well, he says, I doubt he does anymore. He has a good point. Roberts doesn't think that anymore. When Roberts himself was asked about his previous comments at his confirmation hearings in 2005, he flip-flopped. Predictably, his perspective on the issue had evolved. As the law professor Larry Sabato has eloquently put it, on the issue of lifetime tenure, where one stands depends on where one sits. Scalia's joke, nonetheless, seems to put him back on offense. So, he asks, it was an argument that had stymied me before. So what? So, are you going to make me retire with your new constitution? I mean, I've been here longer than 15 years. Oh, he's not on the attack. He's throwing himself on the mercy of my court. No, sir, no, sir. I'm not here to fire Justice Scalia, though I appreciate his acknowledgement of my authority to do so. So what exactly do you propose? I thought he'd never ask. Simple, I say. Your new Article 3. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and the judges shall hold their offices during good behavior. Scalia seems confused, but that's what Article 3 already says. Not exactly, I clarify. I dropped the U from behavior to make it more American. But otherwise, that's Article 3 of the Constitution. Indeed it is, Your Honor. Indeed it is. It was, I was certain, a remedy for Article 3 that an originalist like Justice Scalia could not help but support. We take it literally. We revive the original article, and we honor its original language. Judges shall hold their offices during good behavior. I had him dead to rights. Surely he, a man who swore by the letter of the law, would swear by the letter of this law, that is, save one letter, to which he owed his entire career. I was proud of my judicial jujitsu. Thank you, one person, yeah, right? Not too much. But who, he asks, determines good behavior? Good behavior, I correct him. Thank you. He was pronouncing the U, you're right. That's what I said, he says. Who gets to decide? Well, I've anticipated this question. Scalia listens closely as I propose a judging body composed of 3 people, appointed by the president, whose sole responsibility is to determine whether the justices are passing the good behavior test as revived by my new constitution. He gets what I'm aiming at. A Supreme Court, he says, with a laugh. Scalia is evidently amused by the idea. I can tell he's not ruling it out. Just one question, he says. I raise my chin and allow it. Yes, Your Honor? How long do they serve? I hadn't thought of that. You can probably tell from this. I mean, first of all, he trumped me at every turn. Even when I tried to be funny, he was funnier. When I tried to outlaw him, lawyer him, of course, I knew I was in over my head. But when I say that Justice Scalia is funny, it's not just me saying that. I can say to you right now, Justice Scalia is officially funny. And in fact, he is officially the funniest Supreme Court justice on the bench. Now, how do we know this? We know this because a few years ago, the New York Times actually reported on this. I guess it was about 6 or 7 years ago. There was a St. Louis Law Review study that someone had thought to finally, well, they had just released a big batch of Supreme Court transcripts, and someone thought to count the number of times laughter had been annotated by the stenographer after a Supreme Court justice spoke. And by far, Scalia got the most laughs in the chamber. In fact, he's twice as funny as Stephen Breyer, you'll be happy to know, 19 times funnier than Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Now, we don't know about Clarence Thomas. Because Clarence Thomas, as you may or may not know, has actually not spoken in the chamber for 7 years, something like that. So it's possible, and I think you at Google can appreciate this, it's possible that mathematically speaking, he is infinitely funny. It's possible that every time he opens his mouth, it's a killer laugh. He could be, in fact, the Patch Adams of the Supreme Court. We don't know. We don't know. Now, people say, okay, Kevin, but what do you really think about the Constitution? Are you actually suggesting through your comic Jeremiad here that the Constitution should be scrapped and sold for parts and started over from scratch? And that's a fair question. And as I said before, the Butler I don't want to spoil it too much, but I will say the butler didn't do it entirely, perhaps was an accomplice. And I'll read to you the final section of the book. I'm not spoiling it for you, so you can still pick up a copy later and enjoy the interior part. But this is essentially how I wrap up, that I think you'll enjoy. Keeping in mind the story about the Liberty Bell, so this is a bit of a bookend. Their beloved stamp was in jeopardy. It had been designed carefully and artfully, graced not only with the stately visage of an adored and enduring national icon, but also with the denomination chosen to reflect just how long it would last. Nay, how long it should last. Forever. A forever stamp. It was 2011, 125 years after the statue it featured had been dedicated as a gift from France as a memorial to independence, liberty enlightening the world, and to honor her long journey across seas and centuries, 3 billion stamps had been printed by the patriots at the United States Postal Service. 2 billion had already been issued, countless licked or peeled and stuck, and sent far across town, across the country, and around the globe to enlighten the world one envelope at a time. Alas, forever wouldn't last forever. One eagle-eyed philatelist, armed only with a jeweler's loop, a rabid obsession with detail, and way too much time on his hands, made a shocking discovery. The lady on the stamp wasn't the 305-foot copper and iron neoclassical figure standing sentry on an island in New York Harbor. No, sir. The lady on the stamp was the pint-sized knockoff on the Las Vegas Strip, overlooking not New York, New York, but the New York, New York casino. She hadn't welcomed the huddled masses yearning to breathe free in the new world. She welcomed obsessive gamblers yearning to sidle up to the $3.99 all-you-can-eat buffet. Less the stuff of immigrants' hopes and dreams, a real-life Lady Liberty. More the stuff of fiberglass and styrofoam, a replica Lady Luck. In other words, are you telling me we've got 3 billion of these? Now, a small discolored rectangle that mars her crown's most prominent center spike, after all, a real lady wouldn't be caught dead with such a blemish, was the telltale giveaway. Someone, somewhere, had merely raided a stock photography service and thought, yeah, that seems about right. It must be her, and if it's not, I doubt anyone will notice. Someone noticed. Once alerted to its gaffe, the United States Postal Service released an official statement. But not of apology. Of adoration. Quote, "We still love the stamp design and would have selected the photograph anyway." Right. They admitted no defeat, made no excuses, announced no recall. They also, it must be said, made me proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free to pretend I totally meant to do that, even when I totally screwed up. After all, what was the Postal Service to do? Should it deny it made a mistake, as original author James Madison might have wished in that summer of 1787? And yes, as originalist Antonin Scalia might still advise today. Should it recall the stamp and continue living in the past? That was the unfortunate choice Jonathan Dayton made in his later years when he, the youngest delegate at the Constitutional Convention, stayed so fixated on his participation in Philadelphia that he never once updated even his manner of dress. The last of the cocked hats, they called him. A walking example of arrested development. Or should it make a bold wholesale makeover in a staggering, miraculous flurry of glorious inspiration, as I, Kevin Bleyer, your hero and humble servant, have done in these pages? Well, even if it should, it didn't. Instead of promising a more perfect stamp, the Postal Service insisted the stamp was a more perfect stamp, one that, despite injuries and usurpations brought on by a sloppy postal researcher, still secures the blessings of the liberty as we know her, life-size and in full. It interpreted the advice of Thomas Jefferson that we not look at stamps, or anything really, with sanctimonious reverence and deem them like the Ark of the Covenant, and of James Madison, too, that we not suffer a blind veneration for antiquity, as something slightly different, that we should just get over ourselves, stick with the program, and meet up at the craps table. Baby needs a new pair of shoes. The lesson shines forth as bright and unmistakable as the flame in Lady Liberty's outstretched hand. Sometimes, in order to honor an icon that defines us as a nation, whether it be a giant green woman holding a torch or a Constitution of the United States of America, we should just roll with what we've got because it's still pretty damn awesome. So I would say, now that I've justified this book's existence, my new Constitution's existence, to Justice Scalia, to, of course, to you here in Google and around the world. I'll just conclude with this thought before I can answer a couple of your, what I hope will be softball questions. Now, you're probably asking yourself, Kevin, all right, but does the world really need yet another book about a guy who single-handedly rewrites the Constitution by himself? And I would say yes. Yes, it does. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the Constitution, I don't need to tell you, is hot. Like Hunger Games hot, like 50 Shades of Grey hot. In fact, Jon Stewart called my book 50 Shades of Red, White, and Blue. I'm very thankful. Here's why. People are quoting it even though they haven't read it. People are hiding behind it even though they're not quite sure what it says. And as a piece of literature, the only thing that would make the Constitution hotter, I tell you, was if James Madison were a vampire. It is so popular that right now, somewhere in America, yes, 1,000 Tea Partiers are misquoting it. It's so amazing that somewhere, yes, Kanye West is interrupting an acceptance speech to insist that it should have won. It's so exciting that somewhere, oh boy, Anthony Weiner is tweeting pics of himself having just read it. Which is why, on behalf of America, I have paid every price, bore every burden, and yes, saved every receipt in my quest to assure its survival. And why now, you ask? Well, at a time when Michelle Bachmann believes that the battles of Lexington and Concord were fought in New Hampshire, at a time when Sarah Palin believes Paul Revere made his midnight ride to warn the British that we were armed, and a time when, yes, John Boehner believes that we hold these truths to be self-evident is his favorite part of the Constitution, even though it's the Declaration of Independence, it shouldn't be too hard to believe this, that I, Kevin Bleyer, having no qualifications, am the most qualified man to rewrite the Constitution of the United States. I do hope if you get it, you enjoy it, and if you do, I hope you help me ratify it. Thank you very much. Happy to take a few questions if we have. I think we have about 5 or 10 minutes before we have to wrap up. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. I guess there's a couple microphones even in the aisle. Oh, here's no, there we go. Caught you. Caught you too. Saw that. All right. Well, anyway, thank you very much. It's been much appreciated. Oh, there we go. There we go. There we go.
What I'm curious. I will get the book, but
yeah.
Read through it. But I was curious about your treatment of the for limited time to secure their works and
I couldn't hear you. Sorry.
The copyright and clause.
I do address it a little bit under the free in the First Amendment a little bit, but I don't get into the nitty-gritty the way I'm sure the people at Google here would appreciate that. Here's two thoughts I would say to you. First of all, to be exhaustive, to rewrite every preamble, every article, and every amendment, I have to do a little bit of cherry picking. But what I love is going through, on this book tour especially, getting people's suggestions as to what should be in the paperback version. So I actually could address that as well. And not to mention more broadly, I love this because I don't pretend to know all the answers. I only pretend to know all the answers. So I'm sure people at Google would probably have some good suggestions for me as far as how I should address copyright issues in the next version, which I shall write in at least 19 years, as Thomas Jefferson told me to. Yes, please.
So one question I have a bunch, but I think one of the things I'm most curious about are, what did you find most surprising about reading the document? Like, what do you feel like is something that a lot of Americans in general would be surprised to know is in the Constitution?
Just how, for lack of a better word, dysfunctional, I guess is the de rigueur word, the Constitutional Convention itself was. I mean, it was a maddening cycle of compromise, like I told you. We know of it as the Great Compromise, but we don't know that they did not make any decisions on what was going to be in the Constitution until the very last minute. And that was merely because they were so sick of each other. They kept trying and trying over again. They didn't address the executive branch until middle of the summer, and even when they did, the famous phrase is when they brought it up, a considerable pause ensued. In other words, no one had any idea how to design the presidency. They literally started writing the Constitution before they decided what was going to be in it. They got so sick of each other that they established a even smaller committee of style and arrangement, they called it. That was a group of, I forget if it was 5 or 10 people, but they would at night essentially say, well, here's this. Let's give this a shot. And then the next morning they said, how does this look? Does this look good? And they would actually vote on that, which is ultimately what they did. So it's surprising to me that while we know, of course, they were debating, we didn't know that people like Luther Martin were getting so drunk in the morning that he would give a 6-hour speech and derail the Constitutional Convention for 2 days. It's pretty astounding. That actually part of history was the most surprising to me. I really enjoyed learning about it, and I think the joy in learning about it hopefully is manifest on the pages.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, again, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming out and sharing your lunch hour with me. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.